All right, so a bit about the namespaces. After you have set the current context, kubectl config. After setting the context, kubectl config set, you still have to tell kubectl to use it. It's a bit misleading because set context here means config, change the config. So in the tutorial, there's config view. So if you config view, you will see that in my particular case, I've been interacting with several clusters. You can see this one and that one, and you can also see that there's a few contexts. So you can also do kubectl config get contexts, and you get your context. So subsequently, you need to select one, and this one is using the use context command. So it's kubectl config use context Kubernetes training. And if you now do kubectl get pods, you will see there's no server found for cluster cube. There's something wrong. All right, so here's the screen. I'm having trouble with my mouse here. I don't know why, but it stops working like all the time. Yeah, we might have to use this one as a host name. We'll give it a try. Okay, so this was our first attempt to set a context. Seems to have a problem with the cluster name, as the cluster name does not exist. So we are trying the host. Trying to set use context Kubernetes training. Get pods. Doesn't work either. No server found for cluster. This could be So the cluster has a name. This should be sufficient. Boop, boop, boop. But it's not the name. This is a context, this is a cluster. It's the wrong name. All right. So let's repeat what happened. I'm using a little tool that helps me to switch contexts, and that changed my config file and renamed my cluster from kuberent to Kubernetes, and when I subsequently set the context, I initially didn't use the right cluster name. I used kubectl config view to look into my config. I have seen that the right host name here is in the config, and the cluster described here has the name Kubernetes. So this is how I figured out that it was just the Kubernetes name that didn't work. So I have created the context with config set context. The context name is called Kubernetes training. That context also sets the namespace we want to use, and that cluster we want to use. In this case, it's called Kubernetes. Passes the user, and at this point, we do have the context. And then we still have to use the context, which is done using kubectl config use context Kubernetes training. Okay, and now kubectl get pods shows there are no pods. If I do kubectl get, and I have to check what's the syntax. It's -a, I think it's -n. So kubectl so there are no pods in the default namespace, but I could also ask what are the pods in kube system. So there are some pods. So the -n allows you to specify the context explicitly you're using. Is that a command? Yeah. And with kubectl get current context, you can also ask yourself, well, what's the context? It is the context name shown here. It is not the namespace name. It's just coincidentally that they are the same. So if we go back to our context definition, you can see that we named the context because we are also referring in the context to the namespace, but you could also have a different context here. So don't mix it up if you modify these commands yourself. But it's a way you can then look up your context and see what namespace has been set and so on. So you can make sense of that. So if we do kubectl pods, get pods, it will then automatically use the training namespace. So for all the commands to come, we don't have to specify the namespace separately, but most of the commands, they will take this -n parameter so that you could also specify the context yourself. But I mean, why should we? Now we have a context, we have set the context, there we go.